Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. This week I want to answer a question I received on one of my previous videos. And that question is the R35 Gtr actually an exotic? Now, I got this question on my video about whether or not the R35 Gtr was a SKYLINE. And if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to go ahead and leave a link in the description down below, as well as place a banner above my head. And if you want to check that video out and find out the answer for yourself, you're more than welcome to do that. Now, the question of whether or not the R35 Gtr is an exotic was an interesting question to me because actually I'd never even thought about it. I mean, to me, it's still just a Nissan. And the term exotic for me usually is reserved for cars that are made by Lamborghini, Ferrari, Koenigsegg, and this is just a Nissan. Of course, saying that the GTR is just a Nissan is like saying that the Viper is just a Dodge or the GT40 is just a Ford. It really doesn't do the car justice. So I wanted to try and explore, is this car technically an exotic? Now, for me, an exotic is just an exotic and an import is just an import. I was curious, what is it that makes a car an exotic by definition? And I had to do some research, and of course I turned to the one place that knows everything about everything, Google. And I read a few articles, and there seemed to be some debate around some of the elements of what makes a car an exotic, but there were some that people agreed on, and so I'm going to use those to try and determine whether or not this car is an exotic. The first criteria that I want to address is actually really kind of the biggest one, and that is most exotic cars come from a globally recognized exotic car line. Now, when you think of exotics, you do typically think of a few different brands. Of course, there's Lamborghini, Ferrari, Koenigsegg, McLaren. Those brands have set themselves up already as major exotic car brands, and typically, you know, if you buy one of those cars, you're in the exotic line. Now, we take a look at the GTR. It's made by Nissan, the people that brought you the Sentra, the Corolla, typically not cars you would associate as an exotic. So if we're going to go by this first criteria, already it's looking like the R35 is not an exotic. Piggybacking off the idea that an exotic car has to be made by a globally recognized brand, typically an exotic car is made by a foreign manufacturer, at least for those of us here in the States, which fortunately the R35 Gtr is made by a foreign manufacturer. You know, Nissan is a Japanese company, which would lend to suggest the idea that possibly the R35 could be an exotic. However, for me, exotics typically are European-made cars. You know, when you take a look at the Ferraris, Lamborghinis, the Koenigseggs, all that stuff, typically they're made in Italy or near Italy or Germany or something to that effect. So for me, the fact that the car comes from Japan isn't necessarily a definitive proof that the car can be an exotic. However, according to the requirement that it's made by a foreign manufacturer, technically the GTR does qualify under that. The next requirement for a car to be considered an exotic car is actually a two-part ordeal, and that is the car has to have a high cost but low production numbers. And in that, I do feel that the GTR does qualify. With the engine of this car being hand-built by one of four guys, they really can't make a lot of these cars, nor do I think Nissan really wants to. And of course, the price tag. These cars brand new go for over $100,000, even though we are in the last year of production of these cars. And of course, when we take a look at special editions like the Nismo, those are over $200,000. Now, we're not getting up as high as like $1 million cars when you're looking at something like a McLaren, but this is still not a cheap car. So I do feel under these two requirements, the GTR could qualify as an exotic car. The next element that's required for a car to be considered an exotic is one that I know that I won't compromise on, and I'm sure you won't either. And that requirement is the car has to be fast. I mean, let's be honest, even if a known exotic car manufacturer puts out a car that's slow, none of us are going to consider it to be an exotic. And in this is where the GTR, I believe, starts to set itself up to be an exotic. In fact, I think this is the biggest argument in favor of the GTR being considered an exotic. It is fast. When you take a look at the car, it does 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds. It'll run the quarter mile in high tens, and it has over a 200 mile an hour top end speed, and that is dead stock. So this car is fast. And of course, it was designed to be. Nissan originally designed this car to challenge the Porsche 911 GT3 RS, and it succeeded. And it did it so well that it kind of put the fear into other companies like Ferrari and Lamborghini, because how could a Nissan compete with their famous exotic lines? However, the one problem with the GTR is it really hasn't updated itself since 2009. When you take a look at the engine, the transmission, and suspension, aside from a few minor tweaks, it's really the same car. And in that time, the companies like Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, they have taken that time to make their cars faster and better handling, probably because they were a little scared of the GTR. But despite all that, like I said, the car is fast, and in my opinion, this is the greatest argument as to why the GTR could be considered an exotic. The last element that was brought up by Google for the requirement of a car being considered an exotic is it has to be low slung and it has to look wild. And the GTR may fit that bill just depending on your subjective taste. Now, when you take a look at the GTR, is it low slung? Well, technically yes. When you have a front bumper clearance of only about 4 3/4 to 5 inches high, it's a pretty low car stock. However, I may argue that it's not exactly low slung for one reason only. Look how high the roof is. It sits pretty darn high. And I've commented before when I made my video comparing this to the Supra that you sit pretty high in the car compared to like the Supra or the RX-7 where you sat pretty darn low to the ground. And I'm sure it's the same for something like an Aventador or a Koenigsegg. You're gonna sit like you feel like you're sitting on the pavement. So in that, depending on your definition, if your definition of low slung is that it has low ground clearance, the GTR is definitely gonna qualify. Or if you qualify low slung as meaning that you sit yourself physically closer to the pavement, then the GTR might not be low slung enough to be an exotic. Now, as for the looks, is the GTR a wild looking car? Well, possibly. There again, it's going to depend on your subjective taste. I mean, when you take a look at the car, it's got these sharp angles all over the place. It's wide. It has these huge front headlights and this big wing on the back, where someone may argue it is a wild looking car. However, when you compare it to other cars, like I said, the Aventador, some of these Koenigsegg's or the Paganis, it's not quite as wild looking as some of those cars. However, it may be about as wild looking as a McLaren. Some of these McLarens look like pretty normal cars, and yet we consider them exotics. So depending on your subjective taste, the GTR may or may not be wild enough looking to be considered an exotic. However, if I'm gonna put my personal opinion on this, no, the GTR is not a wild looking car. Is it an aggressive looking car? Yes, but I don't think it gets to that point of being considered wild looking. And there they are. Those are all of the elements, well, at least according to Google, that are required for a car to be considered an exotic car. So to answer the question, is the R35 GTR an exotic car? In my opinion, no, the GTR is not an exotic car. Although it does reach some of the elements that are required for a car to be an exotic. It is extremely fast, it has low production numbers, and it is expensive. And of course, you can say it is made by a foreign manufacturer. However, in my opinion, it doesn't satisfy the other elements. In that, although it is a foreign manufacturer, to me, most exotics come out of Europe. Now, you can say the car is low slung because it has the low bumper clearance, but when you take a look at the roof line, in my opinion, it's not a low slung car. And although the car is an aggressive looking car, it's not that wild looking to put it into the realm of being exotic, nor is it made by a company that is globally recognized as being an exotic car manufacturer. So in that, in my opinion, the R35 GTR is not an exotic. However, I do feel it needs to be in its own special classification because it's also not your typical Nissan. In that, I feel it's closer to something when you take a look at the Viper from Dodge or the GT40 from Ford. Those cars are kind of above and beyond what that car line typically puts out. And there's already a term for that. They're halo cars. I do believe that the GTR is a halo car, is the exact definition of what a halo car is. Although it's close to being exotic, it's not quite there. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button to let me know. It does help the channel out a lot. If you want to see more automotive content in the future, particularly the GTR, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You can now follow me on all forms of social media, which include Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and I'll leave links to those in the description down below. If you'd like to support the channel, I have now opened up the JD Archer shop. If you go to jdarcher.bigcartel.com, you can take a look at a limited selection of t-shirts, hats, and hoodies I have on that website, and there are more designs which are just waiting to be uploaded. I've also become an Amazon affiliate. If you go back to some of my previous videos where I show you how to work on cars, if you go to the description, I now have listed out every tool I use and every part. So if that is a job you need to do on your car, you can take a look through that list and make sure you have everything you need before you get started. If you're missing anything, all you need to do is just click on the link. It'll take you to that item, and that way you know you'll have everything you need by the time it's time to start working on your car. If you have any questions about this video, or you have your own opinion as to whether or not the R35 Gtr is an exotic, go ahead and post in the comment section down below. I will respond to you. I thank you all for watching, and until next time, forget everything else, focus on the finish line.